If it feels like life has abandoned you, like you're completely alone in the void, that may be your soul being tempered. You could be going through the dark night of the soul. The dark night is not depression. Depression dulls the spirit. The dark night purifies and stirs the soul to the divine life. This is the hidden phase of spiritual growth every mystic is tested by to reach the higher states of consciousness. Let's explore this painful yet inevitable part of the spiritual journey. What is the dark night of the soul? Some think of it as going through a very difficult time in one's life, or maybe a crisis of faith. The term comes from the 16th century Carmelite friar St. John of the Cross, describing the purging process the soul goes through in its spiritual ascent to reach the divine. We all have to go through this dark night of the soul in one way or another, because we must remember Earth itself is a schoolhouse, and we're here to learn our spiritual lessons. And like any lesson, when the testing comes, when we have to see if we really have understood a spiritual principle, we kind of have to do it alone. So there'll be times in your spiritual journey where it will feel like the divine isn't there with you, that maybe the divine abandoned you and you were left on your own. And in these moments, it feels like you're standing on a precipice and looking into the great abyss. And in that moment, you see your character. You see your soul for who you really are, in a sense, unclothed. When we're in our comfort zone, when we're in familiar places, we're in our normal patterns of life and activity, and that's perfectly natural. But there has to be these times to sort of uncover all of that, to see what's really going on underneath. We don't plan for these moments. They're sort of part of the natural growth process. And also it becomes a time of what? Letting go. Because in these transformative moments, there is a purging that goes on. We have to release something that was part of our life, but not part of our future life, the life that is unfolding. And before we can see that future life, we have to have that night where it is dark, where we're letting it go for the sake of letting it go, and we don't necessarily know where it's leading to, but it's something we still have to face. Ironically, during these dark moments, when it feels like we've been abandoned by the divine, we really haven't. The divine is there. But like a loving parent, sometimes the parent has to step back and let the child figure it out on its own. If constantly we were being told what to do and everyone else was solving our own problems, we wouldn't really be learning and growing. So we have to go through these. When someone leaves their home for the first time to kind of strike out life on their own, it can feel disorienting. You may have had a very nice life you came from, and suddenly you're in an unfamiliar environment and things, you're struggling maybe a little bit, you're feeling a little disoriented or not sure of your next steps. This is part of the journey. This is part of the forging of your spiritual metal. And every mystic has gone through this. Now, St. John, when he spoke of this, he spoke of it very eloquently. He was considered one of the great Christian mystics of all time, and his writings are classic in the field of study here, to understand that we do have to purge ourselves, in a sense, of the self we once knew, of the attachments, of the pride, of the things in life that we are kind of clinging to. We have to let those things gradually go so that we can claim the divine life. The Bible talks about as children, we knew things in the childlike way, but we have to let go of those childlike things to take on the role of adulthood. Well, we're doing the same thing in adulthood. We are still letting go of things so that we can reach for greater things. Now, this dark night of the soul is actually part of a very ancient process called initiation. This has been done in all the great mystery schools from time immemorial, and the ashrams from time immemorial. And we've come to understand this in more modern times as the idea of death and resurrection. We study the idea that, okay, there is a crucifixion, there is a letting go, but then there is also what? A building up. And this is a natural part of the process that we all have to go through. This crucifixion time, this letting go, they used to have very formal ceremonies for this as part of the surrender. And yes, it's given that extreme image of crucifixion because, of course, sometimes that lower nature, those attachments, the old part of us that is time to shed that skin, doesn't want to let go. And during that time when we're not yet in the resurrection mode, that severing time can come across as painful and suffering. The idea of suffering. Remember, suffering is different from pain in the sense, okay, I put my hand in a fire by accident. That's pain. The pain is telling me to step back, to pull my hand back out. Suffering, especially when we're dealing with some mental, emotional anguish, is the soul struggling with these shifting phases of life. There are divine laws that are in operation. When we're not quite in alignment with them, we're suffering. Because of that, we may not understand why we're suffering, and that's part of the challenge, the confusion. But confusion is the beginning of understanding. So as we're struggling through this, if we hold true to those higher laws, those higher ways of doing things, eventually we work through that difficult moment, that emptiness moment, and then the true resurrection can come up. And the book of Job in the Hebrew Bible, Job was the righteous man that went through extreme suffering, right? And the question was, well, why would the righteous suffer? And that's a very honest question to ask. But really, that book is the story of initiation. The mystic Helena Blavatsky spoke of the book of Job as the story of initiation par excellence. Because in the struggle that Job went through and all the things that were let out and all the crying out that Job did, there's a very telling moment in there where he says, that which I feared most has come upon me. Meaning we all have to face our deepest, darkest fears, and we have to come out the other side. And yes, Job went through a lot, as any initiate goes through a lot in the initiation process. But what many forget is at the end of Job, yes, everything was stripped away from him, his health, his lands, all of it, but he got everything back 10 times over. That which you give up for the divine, you end up getting back multiplied. So this is the journey of initiation. St. Paul spoke of, I die daily, that this is a process that can go on and that we have to deal with. Now, yes, he was dealing with adverse situations when he was bringing forth the spiritual teachings to a whole new era of humanity, but at the same time, he was going through things himself. So there would be these moments where, gosh, it looks like, am I gonna make it? And then you come out the other side, and of course we know when we go through a difficult moment and we make it through the other side, we're actually the better for it. We're more than we were before. It always makes us stronger. So this also tells us we should not be afraid of these moments. They're part of the spiritual journey. And we also know that the journey of ascent, the journey of spiritual growth, is not for the faint-hearted. It takes courage to walk the spiritual path because you are breaking away from current norms. You may be the one that is a little bit on the outside, not because you want to be, but because you're holding true to what is right for you. So this ability to stay tall, there are moments where you may feel alone, but not lonely. There's a big difference between those two things. I can stand alone because I'm never really alone. The divine is always with me. But lonely is crying out for something that I wish I had or would like to have had. That's a very different energy than understanding sometimes I will be in the fellowship of my brothers and sisters in light, and sometimes I may need to walk the path on this particular phase with God alone. And that's fine to be able to do that. Either is good. But this initiation process, and by the way, the death and resurrection, the ancient Egyptians did it, the ancient Greeks did it. They had these very elaborate processes. And of course, in the Christian mysteries, with the idea of the crucifixion, resurrection, it took on a new form. But in the early days of the Christ teachings, they were continuing those mystery traditions as they were in the ancient times. And in a way, we're going through it right now in our own way. The dark night of the soul is not depression. We must make a very clear distinction between the two because it can be a little bit confusing at times. Now, depression, and here we're not speaking of a chemical depression. There can be an imbalance in the body chemistry that can create a depressive effect, and of course you need to seek help. when those things are going on, especially if the depression gets very serious. Here we're speaking of it more from the spiritual point of view, not because of a chemical imbalance, but because of mental, emotional things going on. Now, from the point of view of the auric field, depression is taking in too much of the worries and cares of the outside world. We have chakras in the body, and one of the most important is the heart chakra, which is connected to our world affairs, the activities of our life. It's also the seat of the soul, that while we're incarnate in this physical world, that the seat of the soul is right here in the heart center, meaning everything going on in your life is part of the lessons of your life. Well, but we stand at the door to our own soul, and we can decide what we're letting in and what we're not. And if we start to take every trouble, every issue, every distress, it starts to build. It's like putting more and more weights on you, to the point that it feels like you can't even get up out of a chair. It's not that the soul itself has been, changed in some way, but it's been so burdened by what's going on in our life that it feels like we can't move or do things. So when we're depressed, there is this lack of movement. There is, because we're holding on to too much. We're literally packing it all in to the point that we're overdoing it. So in these situations, you have to let go. The metaphysical teaching is let go the gloom and doom scenarios. You got to be the master of your own life. Yes, you may have difficulties you're going through, or there may be an issue you don't know the answer to yet, but that's why you put it on the altar of the divine. The answers will come as you work with the flow of life, rather than letting those challenges just bury you to a point that you can't function very well. Now, the dark night is ironically almost the opposite of that. Because with the dark night, you're not trying to pull more things into you, of the cares of the world into you. You're trying to do the opposite. You're emptying yourself of things. You're freeing in there. And that process actually has an opposite effect in terms of how you're behaving. For example, let's take Mother Teresa, that accomplished so much in her life. And it was discovered in some of her private letters that she was going through a lot of these dark nights of the soul. Personally, she was going through a lot. But look at what she was doing in her day effort. She was helping countless souls. She was engaged, she was active, and you could see the joy that she was going through when she was helping these souls that are in the most desperate of situations. So that was not depression she was going through. That was the process of purging, the dark night that she was dealing with. But the effect of it was to be active. Again, with St. Paul, okay, he was dying daily. He was going through his own dark night, but he was an incredible force of activity and motion, because in the dark night, you're letting go. And as you're letting go, you're actually more active. You're more engaged in life because you're less attached to the burdens, shall we say, of life, and that frees you to do more. So while the dark night has its pain, there's no question about it, has the suffering, there's a motivating quality to it, because every time you're letting go of something for the divine, you're being filled up by the divine 10 times over. And it's not one giant thing. It's not like I completely empty my cup and then it gets completely filled up. It's a process. And also, by the way, the dark night looks very different in the auric field than depression. Depression looks like charcoal gray energy and clouds of gray. It's a very truly gloomy energy in the auric field. So that's something you have to free yourself of. The dark night is actually a brightening of energy, because as you're dropping away, the aura is getting brighter, it's getting stronger, it's getting more brilliant. The gold and the white and the pink are shining more and more, because again, the strength it takes to get through all of these things. And this brings up another interesting point. Often it's when we're going through these greatest challenges that we're growing the most. If things were really super easy, there wouldn't be the same kind of growth. It's the resistance that we're facing in life and mastering that resistance, right? When you're trying to strengthen, for example, your muscles and you use weights, the weights are creating what? Resistance. And it's that resistance that's making the muscles actually stronger. If you're only lifting the 5 pounds every day, the muscles wouldn't get strong. So the challenges of our life are the very tools for getting that part of us stronger. And if we handle it in joy and gratitude and realize we are not going through this alone, even though it feels like it may be that way at times, then we're constantly aspiring for the higher. And of course, another thing very important here, our sights have to be on the divine. This is the great key. And St. John, he's constantly focused on God. He's constantly focused on the goal. And the goal is to get to God through this purging process, get to the divine area. If we look at some, again, other great literature, the Divine Comedy by Dante, the story of going through hell, then purgatory, and up to the Paradiso, this is the journey we all have to go through. We go through hell in our own way, and then the purgatory is the cleansing process, and then that leads to the more glorious stage of illumination and enlightenment. It's something every mystic goes through, and we're on that journey right now, and we can conquer it. We can reach that greater place. Another key to remember in all of this is this divine road, even when there is the dark nights connected to that road, is all paved in love. Love is there even when at times it appears absent. The divine never abandons us. But there are times when the divine has to step back to help us be stronger again, just like the loving parent sometimes has to step back to let the child even make their own mistakes so they can become their own strong, independent people. The love is still there. So here you want to, if you're going through a difficult time right now, you do want to make a distinction. Is this depression or is this possibly the dark night? If it's depression, of course, you need to seek help. You need to unburden yourself of what's depressing you. At the same time, if it's the dark night, you need to observe and say, okay, I'm going through this right now. What is life teaching me? What is this moment that appears maybe even like despair or looking into the abyss? What am I learning? What has it taught me about my character? Because once I see myself for who I really am, once the appearances, the facades have been pulled away and there I am, clear, I can say, oh wow, here's where I need to do work, or guess what? I really did stand and deliver. And to understand that this is the road to the higher life. This is the road that will lead to your greater glory. And if you're going through this right now, then keep faith, keep heart, keep strong in the path, stay loving, and be kind to yourself. And even if it isn't happening at this moment, recognize that this is part of the journey. This is part of the road to the higher life. It's part of the education training that goes on this planet Earth. If you want to learn more about the dark night of the soul, check out our book, Heaven and Your Spiritual Evolution. And to see more of these videos, subscribe to our channel.